through each one of these portions of the Bloom's Taxonomy quiz just in case there are any questions. So Mr. Sheen has at one time in his life memorized the definition of the word winning. Must it also be true he can actually determine whether or not he is really winning? The idea here, right, is that higher levels of Bloom's Taxonomy require the lower, but the lower do not require the higher. So just because somebody's memorized a term does not mean that they understand it, can apply it, can analyze it, or anything like that. Main difference between application and analysis. The key thing here is in application you have a skill or some knowledge, somebody tells you to use it and you use it. For analysis, you have a whole bunch of different skills, and it's your job to figure out what skills or strategies the situation calls for, and then use it. So you have to identify what's going on first, and then select the appropriate application type strategies. In this case, this is the whole idea, thinking of the weights, right? If I have a comprehension goal and I assess with a recall task, basically, I want them to lift 50 pounds, but I'm only asking them to lift 10. People who can lift 10, maybe they can lift 50, but I'm not sure. Students or people who can't lift 10, well, there's no way they can lift 50. If the goal is to have a student recall some material and you assess them with a comprehension test and they answer correctly, this is the other way around, right? What can you figure out? All right, so in this case, again, I want them to lift 10 pounds. I ask them to lift 20. If they can lift 20, they clearly met my goal. If they can't, well, then they can't. All right. So, right, in this case, if they answer correctly, we're going to assume that they met the learning goal. Finally, we get these last ones. Right, a math teacher, oops, zoomed in a little too much there, has been practicing word problems with her students, here we go, that require them to add fractions and want to see if they can successfully solve new word problems and gives that require them to add fractions. So in this case, teaching them how to do it, say here, go do it, that's application. The second one is an analysis task. A teacher assesses her students by seeing if they can figure out what style of painting different examples represent. In other words, they have to know what the deep structure of those different styles of painting are. They have previously learned the characteristics of each of these styles and how to identify them, but are given new paintings they have never seen before that are all landscapes, again, so that won't be giving anything away. This is the idea that they need to know the different deep structures of the different types of paintings, and then they can identify them correctly using all their skills of identification as to whether or not something comes from a certain movement or not. A shop teacher wants to make sure the students know the safety procedures when working with power tools, gives them a quiz that requires them to list everything they need to do before using various tools. The checklists are given in the course textbook. So again, because they are checklists and they're given in the course textbook, no big deal there. It's just a recall task. What are the things that I need to do? Run through a mental checklist. This next one is comprehension. A teacher wants students to incorporate a science concept, like the water cycle, with their pre-existing knowledge. So she has students make a concept map of how the concepts are meaningful in their own lives, with a short caption that describes each relationship. Now this one, I could see an application interpretation for. It's mostly comprehension in that they're connecting it to other things that they already know. Describing it in new situations that the teacher would give or observations that they make out in the real world would be much more along the lines of application. But the boundary between all of these levels can get very blurred. And these, again, are just categories that Bloom made up to try to describe how we think. They're not perfect, and there's tons of overlap in a lot of cases, and it really depends, oftentimes, exactly how you're thinking of it. A music teacher assigns a semester project to take a piece of classical music and modernize it by making a modified recording that incorporates 5 different top 10 hits of 2015 Everyone got this one right. Synthesis task, taking two deep structures to make something that is effective. The next one, a teacher wants his students to be able to figure out what kind of government exists in any given country by looking at several key things that different governments vary on. He assesses them by giving them some of the countries they previously examined as a class. What level of cognition is he assessing at? The correct answer here is recall. Now, he is trying to get them to either apply or analyze, depending on what you're thinking about. But that's not how he assesses. He assesses by doing something they already went over in class. And at best, that gives him evidence that students remember what they did in class. Right? Oh, we said that America was a democracy, kind of. America was a democracy. And so I don't need to figure it out. I already was told that, and so I can just remember it. And so this is a recall task. A teacher wants students to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, right? This is a recall task as well. And then finally, an evaluation task. A science teacher wants the students to be able to figure out how resilient an ecosystem is to pollution, drought, deforestation, flooding, and invasive species. It gives them an ecosystem, and they have to write up a report with their conclusion. All self-directed. They have the evaluative framework in their heads, or at least they understand how to use it, and they have to make some subjective judgments about it. And everyone seemed to get that one right too. If you have any questions on any of these explanations, let me know. I'd be happy to respond in more detail. All right.